hangar was a cavern of silence, broken only by the faint buzz of fluorescent lights and the echo of restless footsteps. Men and women in lab coats moved about with clipped, frustrated motions, their voices hushed but laced with tension. Weeks of sleepless nights hung heavy in the air, and on the center platform that the Prometheus X3, a sleek silver beast, worth nearly $1 billion, its rocket engine a puzzle that had defeated the brightest minds of Davidson Aerospace. Diagnostic lights glared red on every console, an unyielding reminder of failure. No amount of recalibration, no algorithm, no human hand had coaxed it to life. At the edge of this sterile battlefield, where brilliance collided with futility, a little girl sat cross-legged on a concrete floor. 7-year-old Lily Taylor hummed, a tune under her breath, a soft, airy sound that seemed out of place against the cold steel and sharp tension. Her pigtails swayed gently as she rocked forward on her tiptoes, eyes fixed on a panel she had pried open while no one was watching. Tiny fingers smudged with grease moved deftly, tracing wires, loosening screws, tightening connections. Where others saw a complex labyrinth of metal and fire, Lily saw patterns, rhythms, almost like the music she hummed. "Lily, sweetheart," her mother whispered sharply from across the hangar, her voice brittle with worry. Nancy Taylor's hands trembled as she wiped down a console that gleamed brightly. For her weary eyes, she was dressed in a faded janitor's uniform, her figure small against the towering machines around her. Sweat clung to her brow, not just from work, but from the constant battle she fought inside her body. The diagnosis still echoed in her bones: cancer, the same kind that had stolen her mother. She couldn't afford treatments, she couldn't afford to lose this job, and most of all, she couldn't afford her daughter drawing attention in a place where mistakes cost millions. But Lily barely looked up. "Almost done, Mommy," she whispered, her voice filled with an innocent certainty that belied her age. She tightened the bolt, realigned the stabilizer coil, and brushed dust from the sensor that had been overlooked. Her movements were precise, unhesitating, as though her small hands carried memories that did not belong to a child at all. Nancy's heart thudded in her chest. She glanced around, terrified someone would notice. The engineers were too consumed with their own frustrations to pay attention to a janitor's daughter, but that comforted her little. If they saw Lily now, if they realized what she had touched, it would be over. And then it happened. A low hum rippled through the air, faint at first, then growing stronger. The floor vibrated beneath their feet as the Prometheus X3 engine stirred, like a giant awakening from a long slumber. Warning lights that had blazed red for weeks flickered, stuttered and turned green. The consoles that had screamed failure now pulsed with steady approval. The impossible had shifted. The beast was alive. Gasps broke through the silence, engineers rushing to their stations in disbelief. Fingers flew across keyboards, voices rose in chaotic awe. "It's running, how is it running?" Nancy froze, blood draining from her face. Lily stood calmly, brushing her hands on a red bandana she carried, her humming replaced by a shy smile. The spell was shattered by a single, booming voice. "What in God's name is happening here?" Every head turned as Richard Davidson, the man whose name crowned the company and whose empire had built the Prometheus, stormed into the hangar. His footsteps cracked against the polished floor, the echo of authority that silenced even the boldest of scientists. Immaculate in a tailored suit, his dark eyes swept over the chaos until they landed on the impossible sight. A janitor's daughter standing by the humming heart of an engine worth $898 million. Nancy dropped her rag, her body stiff with fear. She rushed toward Lily, words spilling from trembling lips. "Mr. Davidson, I'm so sorry. She didn't mean, she's just a child." I turned away for a moment, but Davidson's gaze wasn't on her. It was fixed on the small girl, grease-stained and fearless, who had just done what his entire fleet of engineers could not. The silence returned, heavier now, as if the air itself waited for his next word. Asterisk the silence after Davidson's words, pressed down on the hangar like a storm waiting to break. Every engineer in the room froze, their eyes darting between their furious employer and the tiny child who stood with her chin lifted, grease smudged on her cheeks like battle paint. Lily didn't flinch beneath the weight of his gaze. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the bandana again, carefully wiping her small hands with the composure of someone twice her age. Davidson's stride was long and purposeful, his polished Italian shoes clicking against the concrete floor. The closer he came, the more Nancy's panic built. She wrapped her arm protectively around her daughter's shoulders, pulling her back as if the mere act of shielding her might undo the impossible scene. "Did you do this?" Davidson's voice was a low growl now, as though he could barely trust the evidence before him. His hand swept toward the console, where green diagnostic lights still blinked like steady heartbeats. "Answer me, child. Did you make this engine work?" Lily looked up at him with wide blue eyes that carried neither fear nor arrogance, only truth. "Yes," she said simply. "It wasn't hard. The calibration sequence was backwards, and the ionic stabilizer was put in upside down. It was overheating." She tilted her head innocently, as if she were explaining why a puzzle piece didn't fit in a kindergarten toy. "I just fixed it." A ripple of disbelief moved through the engineers, whispers swelling like waves. Backwards calibration, ionic stabilizer. They had tested, recalculated, argued endlessly about those very issues. To hear them spoken so plainly by a 7-year-old was unthinkable. Davidson's lips curled into something between laughter and disbelief. He straightened, throwing his head back with a sharp bark of laughter that startled everyone in the room. "Easy to fix. My team of PhDs has bled themselves dry for 3 weeks over this. And you call it easy?" His laughter carried for only a moment before it faltered. His eyes returned to the child, narrowing as if trying to place a face he had never seen before. And then it happened, the detail that cracked open the moment like glass shattering. As Lily tucked the bandana into the pocket of her denim overalls, the neckline of her shirt shifted, and a glint of silver caught the hanger lights. A small pendant, simple but striking, dangled against her chest. 2 interlocking gears forming. A stylized letter T. Davidson froze mid-breath. The color drained from his face. The laughter died on his lips. He took a slow step forward, eyes fixed on that necklace with a focus so sharp it made Nancy instinctively clutch her daughter closer. Where? Did you get that?" His voice was quieter now, stripped of arrogance, edged instead with something raw. Lily glanced down at the pendant, her fingers brushing it unconsciously. "Mommy gave it to me. It was Daddy's before he died." The words fell like thunder in Davidson's ears. He blinked once, then turned his gaze, truly turned it for the first time on Nancy, the janitor, the woman he had dismissed as background noise. Now, in the shape of her jaw, in the set of her eyes, recognition bloomed. His voice cracked with something he hadn't felt in years. "Your name. Say your full name." Nancy straightened, her fear folding into quiet defiance. "Nancy Taylor, formerly Nancy Richardson." A silence sharper than any before sliced through the room. Davidson's chest rose and fell, his pupils dilating as old ghosts clawed their way to the surface. He whispered the words like a curse. "Richardson, Elizabeth Richardson's daughter." Nancy's lips tightened into a bitter line. "Yes, and you knew my mother very well, didn't you, Mr. Davidson?" Before Dr. James Wilson accused her of plagiarism and destroyed her career. The engineers shifted uneasily, watching as the titan of aerospace stood struck dumb by the weight of history. Davidson's hand trembled as he pulled out his phone, his voice snapping like a whip when he barked into it. "Cancel my schedule. Bring me everything on the Richardson case 15 years ago, all of it, now." When he lowered the phone, his expression was unreadable, torn between fury and something that looked a lot like guilt. "You and your daughter," he said slowly, "are not going anywhere. We need to talk." Nancy pulled Lily closer, her hand tightening over the girl's shoulder. Her voice was steady, though her heart thundered. "After all this time, now, you want to talk?" Davidson didn't answer. His gaze was still on the necklace, that haunting emblem of gears and truth long buried. The hum of the resurrected engine filled the silence, and with it came the chilling realization the past had just come roaring back to life, and nothing, not his empire, not her survival, not Lily's innocence would ever be the same again. The necklace swung gently in the dim light, a tiny glimmer that seemed far louder than the roaring hum of the awakened engine. Every eye in the hangar fixed on it, though none with the intensity of Richard Davidson. He could not tear his gaze away. For years he had locked that image deep within his mind, the interlocking gears, the stylized letter T design sketched on a napkin during a midnight brainstorming session, with a woman who had once been the brightest star in aerospace, Elizabeth Richardson. But this was not Elizabeth. This was a child, a janitor's daughter. Yet that necklace, clutched so casually between Lily's fingers, was unmistakable. Nancy shifted uneasily under Davidson's stare, her heart hammered, but her voice carried the sharp edge of old wounds. Why do you look at her like that, Mr. Davidson? What's this necklace to you? Davidson's throat tightened, the weight of 15 years pressing down on him, because, he whispered, his voice ragged, that symbol belonged to a woman whose brilliance was stolen from the world. He turned his gaze fully to Nancy, studying her as though seeing her for the first time. And now I see her eyes staring back at me through your child. Lily blinked, confusion clouding her innocent features. Grandma, she asked softly, looking up at her mother. Nancy pressed her lips together, holding her daughter close. She doesn't need to know, she muttered, but Davidson stepped forward, ignoring her warning. Elizabeth Richardson, he said, louder now, the name echoing across the hangar. The engineers froze, murmurs darting between them like sparks. On dry grass, some knew the story, most only knew the sanitized version, a scandal, a plagiarism accusation, a woman erased. Nancy's jaw clenched. Yes, Elizabeth Richardson, my mother, the woman your company allowed to be destroyed. Her voice cracked like glass under strain, years of anger trembling just beneath the surface. Davidson felt the floor tilt beneath him, memories climbed through the walls he had built. He remembered Elizabeth in her lab coat, her hands always ink-stained from sketches, her laugh bright and unshakable. He remembered Wilson's accusations, the manufactured evidence, the boardroom vote. He remembered his silence the moment he chose empire over integrity. And now here was Elizabeth's granddaughter, a 7-year-old who had done what his engineers could not. Fix the future with her tiny hands. Nancy saw the flicker of guilt in his eyes and seized it like a blade. You knew, didn't you? Maybe not at first, but you knew Wilson lied. You knew my mother was innocent, and you let her die in disgrace anyway. Davidson's breath caught. The murmurs of the engineers swelled, the forbidden name rippling, like a ghost across the hangar. His empire, his reputation, it all trembled under that name. She died believing she was a fraud. Nancy spat, her voice shaking now with both fury and grief. She died watching men like you get rich on her work, and I was left to pick up the pieces, cleaning your floors, scrubbing your empire's walls, while my daughter grows up with nothing but a necklace to remind her of the woman she'll never know. The silence that followed was suffocating. Davidson's eyes shifted back to the necklace, his hand twitching as though he wanted to reach for it, to hold it, to feel again the promise it once carried. But he stopped himself. Instead, his voice hardened. No more secrets. This ends now. He pulled out his phone again, dialing with a trembling thumb. I want every file, every scrap of evidence from the Richardson case. All of it. Bring it to my office immediately. The engineers exchanged uneasy glances. This was no longer about an engine. This was about something far more dangerous, the foundation of Davidson Aerospace itself. Nancy's grip on Lily tightened as she whispered, why now, after all these years? Why drag us into this? Davidson's eyes, for the first time in decades, looked almost human. Because I thought the past was buried, he admitted, his voice hoarse. But your daughter just proved it's still alive. That engine, her genius, it's her grandmother's blood. And if I don't face the truth now, it will destroy us all. The words hung heavy in the air, laced with dread. The hum of the Prometheus X3 filled the silence, its steady rhythm like the beating of a heart that had been dead too long. For the first time, the great Richard Davidson, the man of steel, the architect of an empire, looked less like a king and more like a man haunted by ghosts. He could no longer ignore Dot, and in the reflection of the engine's polished steel, the image of a little girl with grease on her hands and a necklace on her chest seemed to promise that those ghosts were only just beginning to rise. Asterisk, the night stretched heavy over Houston, but the top floor of Davidson Aerospace glowed like a beacon above the city. From the vast windows of his office, Richard Davidson could see the lights of the skyline stretching endlessly, each tower a testament to ambition, wealth, and survival. Yet for the first time in decades, he felt no pride in what he had built. The green diagnostic reports from the Prometheus X3 lay open on his desk, but his eyes weren't on them. They were on the child, curled on a leather chair in the corner, her little hands turning over the pieces of a broken pocket watch he had given her to keep busy. The rhythmic click of gears under Lily's fingers was the only sound in the room. It was eerie, unsettling, like the ticking of time itself, measuring how long he could delay the inevitable. Nancy sat nearby, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her gaze sharp as glass. She wasn't there as an employee anymore. She was there as a daughter defending a legacy, And Davidson knew she could cut him down with a single word if she wanted to. "You owe me the truth," Nancy said finally, her voice low but steady. "You owe it to my mother. You stood by and watched while James Wilson destroyed her life. And you let him. Davidson swallowed hard. He had rehearsed this moment for years in the quiet of his conscience, but hearing it aloud made his throat burn. He leaned back, eyes lifting to the ceiling as though searching for words among the shadows. "I didn't just let him," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I helped him." The words sliced the air into Nancy's breath caught, her knuckles whitening where her fists clenched in her lap. Lily looked up from the watch, sensing the shift in the room, her innocent eyes darting between the adults. Davidson pushed away from the desk, pacing to the window. 15 years ago, Elizabeth was on the edge of a breakthrough. The Richardson engine wasn't just an upgrade, it was revolution, cleaner, faster, more stable than anything NASA or private aerospace had imagined. We were partners, Wilson and I, and we both knew if Elizabeth unveiled it first, our names would be forgotten. Wilson came to me with an idea. He said we could bury her, said we could use her own notes, twist them, claim she had stolen from us. His reflection in the glass looked like a ghost. I didn't believe it at first. Elizabeth was a genius, but Wilson was persuasive. He manufactured evidence-style minds, altered prototypes, testimonies, and I stayed silent. When the board voted, when the journals blacklisted her, when the lawsuits piled up, I said nothing, because my empire was being born out of her ruin. Nancy rose to her feet, trembling with rage. "You let her die branded a thief. You let my mother drown in shame while you built skyscrapers out of her bones." Her voice cracked. The years of bitterness and grief clawing their way free. "And now you sit in this office, rich beyond measure, while I scrubbed your floors to pay for food." Davidson's chest heaved. "Do you think I don't know? Do you think I don't hear her voice every night when I close my eyes? Elizabeth trusted me. She believed in me, and I betrayed her. Every rocket we've launched for the past decade is a monument to my cowardice." The room went silent. The ticking of Lily's watch suddenly deafening. Then, like a blade slipping between ribs, Nancy whispered, "She died of cancer, you know. The same kind I have now." Davidson turned sharply, his face draining of color. "What?" "She fought until the end, even after the world spat on her name. And now it's back. The same disease, eating at me just like it ate at her. But you wouldn't know that, would you? Because for you, she was just an obstacle, a casualty on the road to glory." The truth hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back a step, pressing a hand to the desk for support. His empire, his billions, all of it suddenly felt like ash in his mouth. Lily, sensing her mother's pain, slid off the chair and climbed onto Nancy's lap, wrapping small arms around her. Her voice was soft but piercing in the silence. "Mommy, Says grandma was a hero. Was she, Mr. Davidson?" Davidson's throat tightened. The innocence in her voice cut deeper than Nancy's fury. He knelt slowly, lowering himself until he was eye level with the child. For the first time, his polished mask cracked and raw humanity seeped through. "Yes," he whispered, his eyes glistening. "She was a hero, and I was the villain who betrayed her." The pocket watch in Lily's hands clicked one last time and began to tick again, alive after years of silence. She smiled and held it out to him. Proud of her small victory, Davidson stared at the tiny gears moving in harmony, and a thought carved itself into his mind like stone. If a child could restore what was broken with nothing but patience and honesty, then perhaps, just perhaps, he could too. But he also knew the cost of truth, and he knew that once he set this course, it would burn through everything he had built. The next morning came heavy with storm clouds that seemed to press against the glass walls of Davidson's office. The Houston skyline, usually a proud reminder of his dominance, looked pale and uncertain under the shifting gray. For the first time in years, Richard Davidson did not care about the markets opening, the contracts waiting, or the fleet of rockets that bore his name. He sat at his desk, files strewn across the polished surface, his eyes locked on a single folder stamped with a date, 15 years ago. Nancy sat across from him, her arms folded, her posture rigid. She wasn't impressed by the view, the wealth, or the trappings of power. She had spent years cleaning up this empire's crumbs, and now she was face to face with its rotten core. Lily was perched on the carpet near the window, still tinkering with the pocket watch, her humming soft and oddly soothing in the tense room. Davidson exhaled, opening the folder with shaking hands. Inside were memos, technical drawings, affidavits the arsenal Wilson had once unleashed to destroy Elizabeth Richardson. He scanned the pages, and the lies hit him like a physical weight. Timelines altered, schematics switched, witness statements coerced. He remembered these documents. He remembered believing them, or rather, choosing to believe them. Wilson wrote this. Davidson muttered, tapping a damning memo, claiming Elizabeth's design was lifted from his prototypes. But look, this schematic is hers. I recognize her handwriting. He traced over her work and stamped it with his name. Nancy leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. And you let him? Davidson's shoulders sagged. I was blind. No, I was greedy. He promised me the empire we have now. Promised me legacy, and I let him bury your mother under the weight of forged paper and lies. The door to the office opened then, and a young maid entered, carrying a box. Mr. Davidson, these are the archives you requested. Security had to unlock the sealed cabinet. Davidson waved him out. He pulled the lid off, revealing a treasure trove of ghost soul blueprints, photographs, and notebooks. One leather-bound journal caught his attention immediately, Elizabeth Richardson's. The sight of her handwriting, elegant yet firm, made his chest ache. He flipped through the pages, and with every sketch and note, the truth screamed louder. The Richardson engine was hers. Nancy's hands trembled as she took the journal. She pressed it against her chest, her eyes brimming with tears she refused to shed in front of him. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't a fraud. She was right all along. Davidson looked away, guilt carving deeper into his face. But then Lily's small voice broke the tension. If Grandma made the engine, then why did everyone believe the bad man? The innocence of the question made Davidson flinch. He crouched beside her, the billionaire CEO lowering himself until he was eye level with a child. Because sometimes, sweetheart, the world believes the loudest voice, not the truest one. And I was too much of a coward to shout the truth. A silence settled over the office, thick with unspoken grief. Then Davidson straightened, a decision hardening in his eyes. No more silence. Wilson's lies built this empire, but I'll tear it down brick by brick if I have to. I will clear your mother's name. Nancy's voice was sharp, full of disbelief. And why now? Why should I believe you after all this time? Davidson stepped closer, lowering his tone. Because I can't unsee what your daughter did yesterday. I've watched my best minds fail for weeks. And Lily fixed in minutes what billions of dollars couldn't. That genius didn't come from me or from Wilson. It came from Elizabeth. It lives in Lily, and I'll be damned if I let the same injustice crush another generation. The words hung in the air, vibrating with something dangerous. For the first time in years, Richard Davidson wasn't speaking as the untouchable billionaire. He was speaking as a man who had decided to risk everything. He reached for his phone, dialing an old number. His hand trembled, but his voice was still when the line clicked. James Wilson, we need to talk. Nancy's eyes widened. You confront him after all these years? Davidson nodded. I have no choice. He's the key. If I can prove he falsified the case against your mother, the world will know the truth. But make no mistake, if I go after him, he'll come for me, for all of us. His gaze flicked toward Lily, who was now holding up the ticking pocket watch proudly. The air in the office grew heavier, charged with the storm outside. Davidson's empire trembled on the edge of collapse, but in his gut, he knew this was the only path forward. Truth would cost him everything, but perhaps, for once, that was the point. The pocket watch ticked steadily in Lily's hands, louder now, as if counting down to a confrontation years in the making. Asterisk, the storm outside had broken into sheets of rain by the time Richard Davidson arrived at the private club, where James Wilson still conducted his affairs. The building was all polished mahogany and brass fixtures, a monument to old power where silence was enforced by wealth and reputation. Davidson hadn't set foot there in years, but as he walked through the heavy doors, the eyes of men in tailored suits turned to him, their expressions flickering with recognition, curiosity, and a hint of unease. Nancy and Lily weren't with him. He left them under heavy security at his penthouse, a precaution he never would have taken before yesterday. But the moment he had said Wilson's name, Nancy's warning glance told him what he already knew. This wasn't just business. This was war. James Wilson sat in his usual corner, whiskey glass in hand, eyes sharp despite the years. His hair had silvered, his frame thickened, but the aura of calculation hadn't faded. He looked up as Davidson approached, and a smirk curved his lips. Well, Richard Davidson himself. It's been too long. To what do I owe the pleasure? Looking to reminisce about old triumphs, Davidson sat opposite him, the weight of years heavy on his shoulders. He didn't bother with pleasantries. I've reopened the Richardson file. The smirk faltered, just slightly, but Davidson noticed. Wilson swirled his drink lazily, as though unbothered. Why dig up ghosts? Elizabeth Richardson is long gone, and so are her mistakes. Let the past stay buried. Davidson leaned forward, his eyes like steel. It wasn't her mistake. It was yours. You forged evidence. You doctored prototypes. You destroyed her life to build ours. His voice sharpened. I let you once. I won't again. Wilson chuckled, though the sound rang hollow. You've grown sentimental in your old age, or maybe you've gone soft. What's this about, Richard? Guilt? Or is it that little janitor and her miracle child? I heard whispers from your hangar. The girl tinkered with the Prometheus engine, didn't she? His smirk widened. Remarkable. Blood tells, doesn't it? Asterisk, the mention of Lily made Davidson's jaw clench. Leave them out of this. Wilson's smile turned predatory. Why should I? If you drag this into the light, you'll drag them with it. Do you think the board will forgive you for admitting our empire was built on lies? Do you think the government will? Every contract, every launch, every achievement they'll be tainted. You'll fall harder than she ever did. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. And that child of hers will be branded the granddaughter of a fraud all over again. Do you want that for her, for a moment? Davidson's resolve wavered. Wilson's words carried the poison of truth. The empire would collapse. Billions would vanish. But then he thought of Nancy's hollowed eyes, of Lily's small hands repairing what giants could not, of Elizabeth's journal filled with sketches the world had never seen. I'd rather fall with the truth, Davidson said quietly, than stand another day on a lie. Wilson's smirk snapped into a snarl. He slammed his glass onto the table, whiskey sloshing over the rim. Then you're a fool. If you go down this path, you won't just lose your empire. You'll lose your freedom. I made sure of it. Every signature, every approval, it has your name beside mine. You were complicit, Richard. You may think confession will redeem you, but it will destroy you. And your little janitor friend along with her genius daughter. Asterisk, Davidson didn't flinch. Then we fight. In the light of day, I'll drag your lies into court, into the press, into the halls of Congress if I have to. You underestimate me. James, you always did. For the first time, Wilson's composure cracked. His eyes darkened. His jaw set. If you try, you'll regret it. I'll scorch the earth around that child until no one remembers her name, just like I did to her grandmother. The threat landed like a blade, but Davidson only rose from the table, his towering frame casting Wilson in shadow. You won't touch her. You won't touch Nancy. Because this time, I'm not silent. He turned and walked away, the storm outside echoing, the storm now raging inside both men. Wilson's glare followed him out, and Davidson knew this was only the beginning. The battle lines had been drawn, and the cost would be everything. Back in the penthouse, Lily was waiting, her little hands still clutching the pocket watch that ticked steadily in her lap. As Davidson entered, her blue eyes lit up, and for just a moment, the weight on his shoulders lifted. The storm might tear his empire apart. Wilson might come at him with everything he had. But as he watched Lily's innocent smile, Davidson knew one truth. He could no longer run from the past. And when the reckoning came, he would face it armed, not with rockets or wealth, but with the legacy of a woman he had once betrayed, and the brilliance of the child who carried her life forward. Asterisk, the rain had stopped by dawn. But the city outside Davidson's penthouse looked washed clean, as if waiting for a reckoning. Richard Davidson hadn't slept. He stood by the glass wall, coffee untouched in his hand, watching the skyline turn from gray to gold. On the couch, Nancy slept lightly with Lily curled against her, the child's fingers wrapped around the ticking pocket watch as though it were a talisman. For Davidson, the sound was a drumbeat, counting down to the moment when truth and ruin would collide. When the knock came, it wasn't tentative. It was sharp, decisive. Security ushered in a woman in her 50s, hair streaked with gray, carrying a thick folder pressed to her chest. She introduced herself as Angela Clark, an investigator he hadn't seen in over a decade. Years ago, she had raised questions about the Richardson case, but was silenced where Wilson's influence crushed her career. Davidson had called her in the middle of the night, and to his surprise, she'd come. "You were right to call me," Angela said, her voice firm. She placed the folder on the table, her hands lingering on it as if it were more dangerous than a weapon. "I've kept copies of the files Wilson tried to bury. I didn't know who to trust then. But now," she looked toward Nancy and Lily, "now it's clear why the truth needs to breathe." Davidson opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were patent records, signed affidavits, and most damning of all, a hidden company registered under Wilson's name 15 years ago. The company had one asset, a patent filed 3 weeks after Elizabeth Richardson was accused of plagiarism. The patent contained her designs almost word for word, down to the stylized T she had used to mark her original drafts. Nancy gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That's her signature," she whispered, pointing to the sketches. "She always signed her diagrams with the T as stood for truth." Davidson's chest constricted. He remembered that night vividly, Elizabeth laughing as she carved the little gear-shaped T into the margin of her notes, saying it was her way of reminding herself that engineering wasn't just about equations, but about honesty, and Wilson had taken even that from her. Lily climbed onto the table, peering curiously at the documents. Her small fingers traced the familiar emblem, the same one that hung on her necklace. "Grandma made this," she said softly, pride ringing in her voice. "Yes," Davidson said, his voice thick, "and Wilson stole it." But Angela wasn't finished. She pulled out one final piece, a letter, unsigned, typed in Wilson's old office, the words cut like steel. "Davidson is hesitant. He still thinks Elizabeth could expose us. If he doesn't fall in line, I'll use the documents to ruin him too. This empire will belong to us, and Richardson will rot." The silence that followed was heavier than anything yet. Davidson's hand shook as he read the letter aloud. All the years of guilt crystallized into rage. He had not only betrayed Elizabeth, he had been manipulated, controlled, threatened into silence by a man who had planned everything like a chess game. Nancy's voice was hoarse. "So now you see it. He destroyed her. He destroyed us, and he used you like a pawn." Davidson slammed the folder shut, the sound reverberating like a gavel. "No, not anymore." His voice grew stronger, each word fueled by years of regret. "Wilson thought he could bury the truth forever, but this time, I'll bring him down in front of the world." He turned to Nancy, his expression stripped of arrogance, stripped of pride. "Elizabeth was innocent, and I will clear her name. Not for me, not for my empire, for her, for you, for your daughter." Nancy studied him, her eyes still filled with distrust, but beneath it flickered something else, something almost like recognition. Perhaps, for the first time, she saw not the billionaire, but the broken man underneath, clawing his way toward redemption. Lily slid the necklace off her neck and placed it gently on the folder. "If Grandma's T means truth," she said, her voice pure, "then maybe it's time you tell everyone the truth, Mr. Davidson." The words struck deeper than any accusation. Davidson felt his throat close, his eyes sting. Out of the mouths of children came the kind of clarity men spend lifetimes running from. By nightfall, the press conference was called. The board raged, lawyers warned, but Davidson was immovable. Cameras flashed, journalists jostled. The world tuned in. He stepped up to the podium, the folder at his side, and for the first time in his long career, he did not speak of rockets or profits or innovation. "I come before you," he began, his voice steady, not as a titan of aerospace, but as a man who has carried a lie for 15 years. Elizabeth Richardson, a pioneer, a visionary, was accused of theft. That accusation was false. Her work was stolen, her reputation destroyed, and he faltered, but then steadied himself, looking toward Nancy and Lily seated in the front row. "I was complicit in her fall." Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras zoomed in. The truth was no longer hidden in dusty files. It was alive, roaring into the light. "And now," Davidson said, his voice rising, "I will tear down every wall, burn every contract, and drag every document into the sun until her name is cleared. This empire does not belong to me. It belongs to her legacy, and it belongs to the future carried in the hands of her granddaughter." The crowd erupted, some in outrage, others in awe. The world shifted in that moment. Richard Davidson, the untouchable billionaire, had detonated his own empire with the truth. But in the front row, Lily smiled and held up the pocket watch, ticking steadily, as if marking the beginning of a new Tom died, and Nancy, with tears she could no longer hold back, whispered to her daughter, "Your grandmother's light is finally free."